Cancer. That 6-letter word for many brings fear, it can bring anxiety, and it can bring dread. I'm sure inside of this room and those watching online, when they think of cancer, it has directly affected either themselves or somebody they know, or even somebody who is extended family. I must be honest though, when I was younger, in my 20s, I knew very little about cancer. If you would have asked me about that disease or even that word and what it means, I could share very little. But in 2002, this all changed for me for the rest of my life. First my dad, then my wife's grandmother, then my mother-in-law, then my own mother were diagnosed with cancer in the span of 2 years. Eventually, they also all died from cancer, the last being my dad, who died just this past summer. But it really hit home for me in 2004 when my own wife, at the age of 34, was diagnosed with cancer. And this was about 1 month after my mom hearing the news of her cancer. So I was processing all this, and I found myself with my wife actually at the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, where we were living at the time, where I was on staff at a church in northern Minnesota, and it's located in Rochester, Minnesota, so it's a good several hours away, and we decided to go there for a second opinion. I was living there with my sons, who were 3 years old at the time and 1.5 years old. And I was sitting in this huge waiting room, I remember it very vividly, at the Mayo Clinic. It actually is the upper floor, the top floor, the 12th floor of the Mayo Clinic. And that whole floor is devoted to oncology, or really cancer or cancer treatment. And I was in seminary at the time, and I still remember reading a book for one of my classes. And the classes was entitled, listen to this, Self-Leadership and Soul Care. And I was reading this book, and I was in chapter 4. I still remember this vividly as I read this book. And it was all about, when do you feel closest to Christ in life? And at that point, I felt very discouraged. I felt very disappointed. I, in some ways, felt very alone. My wife, again, was in getting her second opinion. I was in the waiting room, and I looked up from reading this book, reading this chapter even, about when do you feel closest to Christ, and I looked around this waiting room, and everyone in the waiting room was like 60 or 70 years old. And I'm 33 years old. The author in the book had just written about, and I just read this page about, when do you actually feel closest? And his conclusion was, you feel closest to Christ when you go through trials and challenges in life. You feel closest because you come to the realization that it's not about you anymore, is it? You can't rely on anything else. And you know what I felt? I looked up from this page and I saw all these other folks who were, again, much older, sitting alone in this waiting room, and I was upset. I was discouraged. Cancer was for older people. It wasn't for us in our early 30s. Feeling frustrated, this is what I said out loud, and if you were sitting next to me, you could have heard it, but farther away, you couldn't hear it. I said these words. I said, I'm not supposed to be here. I am not supposed to be here. It felt like a dream. And that day began what I would describe as a 4-month journey of discouragement. I watched my mother go through cancer treatment. I watched my wife at the same time go through cancer treatment. I grieved about the loss of my dreams at that age, for my life, for my family. We weren't supposed to be going through this. But over time, let me tell you, I discovered something wonderful. Something about the powerful love and grace that only comes through Jesus Christ. I experienced Christ's love, and what I eventually saw is 3 phases of biblical grieving. These 3 phases are 3 P words that I remember to this day, or 3 P statements. First, I needed to pay attention to pain from Scripture. When you study Scripture, you see pain at different times with different people. I studied the life of Job. I studied the Psalms, which 2/3 of are laments to God. I saw that Christ identified totally with where we were at that moment, at that time in our lives. He had come to be born. He had come to live in our sinful, fallen world. He had paid attention to his tests and trials throughout the Gospels. And I paid attention to that. Therefore, Christ was who I had to trust in fully and completely, regardless of the situation, to handle the pain and discouragement at that time. Over time, I also experienced freedom. I trusted in his word. I trusted in his plan for my life, although I didn't at times understand it. Second, I learned that I had to be patient. I had to wait on him and his plan for my life. Psalm 37, verse 5 was great comfort to me. It says these words. It says, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will act." A prayer for my journal at this time was, God, please help me in my unbelief. Please help me in my doubt. And please help me in my discouragement. Christ enabled me to trust in him. He alone, though, really when you think about it, delivers hope. He delivers new life to us regardless of the situation. Now, let me tell you, we had prayed over Angie. We had anointed her with oil. We wanted to see a miraculous healing. But the healing that God provided in her life came through time. It wasn't a one-time, one-moment type of healing. Hope and healing for her came through cancer therapies, surgery, radiation, and especially Christ's love and grace to us. I realized that hope doesn't come through a change in circumstances. I couldn't control them. I could not control health. But what I could do is trust in God's timetable of healing, even when it seemed as if he was silent. Third, Christ taught me that I needed a change in perspective. Our lives were more about Christ than cancer. I began to see that Christ had something different for my life, that I had plans up till that time. What was past had to give birth to something new. In other words, life wouldn't necessarily be better. It wouldn't necessarily be worse. Life from 2004 on would be different from my expectations. And I hope you'll remember this point, if you remember nothing else about the words that I share today, about having a Christ perspective, by something I brought today to show you. Let me get it for you. Does anyone know what this is? This is a transformer. Now, I didn't grow up with a transformer, but a lot of kids do. And so I had to learn this past week as I got this a couple weeks ago. And it looks like a robot, right? But when you move it a certain way, and I'll see if I can do this properly and rightly. Let's see if I can do this here. Move it a certain way, it takes on a new shape, and now it's like a rocket ship. It's like a rocket ship. Now, when you first look at a transformer, obviously, as I said, it looks a certain way. It looked like a robot. But when you simply move it, it now looks like something totally different. Whether you like it the first way or the second way, well, that's up for debate. We all have different perspectives on that. However, when this transformer was created, the person who created, or maybe the people who created, who had the idea, they saw both objects, the robot and the ship, they saw it as valuable, important. This is what I learned about my life in relation to Christ, about having his perspective. I saw his immense love for me and for my wife and for our family, both before her diagnosis and now the new normal of life after cancer. Life after cancer obviously had impacted our family. And at this time, though Angie has only these annual visits to the doctor many years later, we rejoice that since 2004 and also in 2009, when she went through another serious bout of cancer, that she is now cancer-free. However, Going through cancer didn't make life worse. It didn't necessarily make life better. It was just different. Christ was calling me through it all, in my perspective, to trust him, regardless of what we went through and regardless of what we will go through. To trust him essentially because he was trustworthy. To trust him in my perspective because he had always been with us. He had lovingly watched over me up until 2004, and he would continue to do so. He was there. I want to close with mentioning and reminding you of a popular song from many years ago that Bette Midler sang. And in her song, her perspective was totally wrong. She sang years ago that God is watching us from a distance. From her, you get the impression that God is just cosmically watching us, not caring, not involved with us, his creation. It's one of the most dangerous thoughts that you can have. Because, in fact, the opposite is true. Because God sent Jesus to be with us, to sit with us through the pain, to walk with us as we patiently wait on his plan, because of these things, our perspective and my perspective could be different. My perspective was that these light and momentary troubles, these light and momentary afflictions are nothing. They're nothing when compared to the surpassing riches of his grace and forgiveness because of his constant presence with us. Thanks.